I wasn't really all that high on the Detroit Lions heading into this 2013 season. And before the season started, I did say that this was it for Jim Schwartz. He was on the hot seat. Either his team made the playoffs or he was going to get fired. However, at one point in time during the year, it definitely looked like the Detroit Lions were going to be able to win the NFC North and potentially comfortably. Because you figure the Bears were dealing with their own injury issues and other problems, and the Green Bay Packers didn't have Aaron Rodgers for an extended period of the second half of the season. It looked like it was perfectly positioned, especially since the Lions beat the Bears twice in the regular season, where the Lions were going to be able to coast and be able to win the NFC North easily by at least a game, if not two or more. But then what had become a calling card in an MO, really, of the Lions under Jim Schwartz, the team lacked discipline, they lacked focus, they failed to get the job done when they needed to, and ultimately found a way to screw the pooch, finish 7-9, and completely miss the playoffs. How that happens, I have no idea. I have some idea, I should say, but I mean, you just can't allow that to happen. And ultimately, the time had come. Jim Schwartz had to go in Detroit, and ultimately, he got the axe, and he needed to. Now, some may be able to raise the question of whether or not the general manager, Martin Mayhew, should be let go or not, and that's an argument that I might be able to bring to the table and be like, what did he do that was so great? He built this team that ultimately failed under Schwartz. Why isn't he being let go too? But it seems like at the moment, maybe the Lions as an organization feel like they're really not that far away. They just need the right guy as the head coach. They don't want to go through wholesale changes in an organization. And I get that because this is a very talented football team. And with the right leadership, vision, and direction, this is a team that could contend for a playoff spot in 2014, a divisional title in 2014, and maybe do some even more damage in the years to come. And I get that lot of Lions fans are frustrated. They dealt with years of Matt Millen, and the Lions have never been to the Super Bowl. They're one of the few teams that has never been to the Super Bowl. So I get it. You know, Bobby Lane's not walking through that door anymore. The 1950s aren't here. Joe Schmidt's not walking through that door anymore. So I get the frustration of Lions fans, and I understand it, and it makes a lot of sense. But the bottom line is this team really isn't that far away from being a contending team. And I really mean that. There are some things that need to happen, some important things that need to happen, but I don't think they're all that far away. And I do ultimately think that firing Jim Schwartz was the right call. It was the right thing to do. Now, as of me recording this, the Lions have still not hired a head coaching or a head coach to replace Jim Schwartz. And we'll see by the time this is uploaded whether or not that's actually taken place or not. Some of the candidates you might look at that may suit that job very well. I think Ken Wisenhunt, the Chargers offensive coordinator, the former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, would work tremendously well in Detroit. I really do. Maybe somebody like a Jay Gruden would work out well. A Darrell Bevell from Seattle is their offensive coordinator. He would work out well in Detroit. Maybe Adam Gase, Peyton Manning's offensive coordinator in Denver. Maybe he would work out very well, especially since you see what Mike McCoy was able to do in San Diego this year. Not only did the Chargers make the playoffs, they won a playoff game on the road against Cincinnati. It's impressive. So the reason it's important for this team to get the head coaching search right is they need to find an offensive minded head coach. And they need to find a guy that can impart some discipline and some direction into an organization that desperately needs it. They need to bring in a quarterback friendly head coach that will be able to get Matthew Stafford to improve where he needs to improve, take that next step, and not just be a franchise quarterback, but potentially be the elite quarterback that at times he has shown the ability and talent to be just that. But you need somebody that can come in and get Matthew Stafford to understand that he does need some work on his mechanics. He definitely needs to improve his decision making. He needs to understand how to read certain situations. He needs to understand when to take chances and when to not. He needs to understand that sometimes when he goes with all these different arm angles and delivery angles, that sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not. He needs some improvement in his consistency in his footwork and his overall mechanics, which will help improve his accuracy, etc. Because as talented as Matthew Stafford is, and as good as some of the numbers he's put up have been, you know, there are times where his accuracy is definitely waning. A lot of high throws, a lot of worm burner throws, as I would call them, balls that fall short of the receivers. Imagine if he was more consistent in his delivery. Imagine if he was more consistent in his footwork and his mechanics, how much his accuracy would improve and how much his overall numbers would improve and how much more dangerous the Lions offense would be as a whole. To me, I look at the Detroit Lions in this offseason and I say that to me, they are the most appealing head coaching vacancy out there. Out of any of the ones that came open, I think the Lions are the most appealing because here's what you've got: a franchise quarterback in Matthew Stafford, who, with the right guy to direct him, could potentially become an elite NFL quarterback. You've got a great 1-2 tandem at running back in Reggie Bush and Jacques Bell, a 1-2 tandem that a lot of teams in the NFL would die to have and would kill to have and would love to have. You've got the best wide receiver in the National Football League in Megatron, Calvin Johnson. You've got an improved offensive line. On the defensive side of the ball, you've got 3 first-round picks in that front four in Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley and Ziggy Ansah. That's a team that a lot of people, you would think, would be dying and chomping at the bit to coach. I know I would. If I was a coordinator somewhere and looking to get my first head coaching gig, I want to go to Detroit. No question. Because, again, with the right vision, the right direction, and the right leadership that could instill some discipline, some mental toughness into this team and this organization, you're talking about a Lions team that could turn around in 2014 and win 10 or 11 games, win that NFC North, and make some noise in the NFC playoffs. No question about it. In terms of this team's approach, in the offseason, obviously finding the right head coach, the all right offensive-minded, quarterback-friendly head coach is the most important thing. But when we come to improvements, one of the things that I think this organization needs to do in this next draft is figure out what direction they want to go. They still need help on the defensive side of the football, in particular in the secondary at the corner position. They've spent some picks on corners, and I don't know how well it's really worked. You've got a nice tandem of safeties in Delmas and Quinn. Your linebacking core, I think, is a bit weak. And like I said, you've got a very, very talented and explosive, multidimensional front four with the guys like Suh and Fairley and Ziggy Ansah. And the good thing about that, if you're the Detroit Lions, not only have you spent 3 first-round picks on the defensive line, and they're all young and talented and explosive and can impact the game on both the running game and the passing game potentially, it's a very young defensive line. Suh's going to be going into his 5th year next year. Ansah's going to be going into his 2nd year. Fairley's going to be going into his 4th year. So you could potentially argue that these guys haven't even reached the peak of their career and the peak of what they can do together. And if you get all these guys locked up long term, down the road, this is going to be the identity of this Detroit Lions organization potentially on the defensive side of the football for many, many years to come as a coach who would not want to come into that type of situation. But they got to figure out, do they want to get some more help in the back 7 of that defense? And there's definitely an argument to be made there that they need help there. And somebody like an Anthony Barr or Khalil Mack or a C.J. Mosley would definitely fill the bill and do a lot to help out this defense. And there's no question about that. Maybe somebody like a Darquise Dennard or a Justin Gilbert at corner, and they would help too. But I think if you're going to bring in an offensive-minded head coach, and you want to make sure that you get the absolute most out of Matthew Stafford, and you want to get the absolute most out of Calvin Johnson, you must, with that 10th overall pick, understand that for so many years you have spent so much money in free agency, so many 2nd and 3rd round draft picks on wide receivers that haven't worked. You need to find that legit number 2 option opposite of Calvin Johnson. When you look at the Green Bay Packers in that same division, you've got Jordy Nelson, you've got Randall Cobb, you've got Jarrett Boykin, they've got James Jones, and they'll probably let James Jones go because of what Jarrett Boykin was able to do. You've got all of these weapons on the offensive side of the football, in particular in the passing game. You look at the Chicago Bears. They have a Martellus Bennett at tight end, but you look on the outside, you've got Brandon Marshall. And what allows Brandon Marshall to flourish is that Alshon Jeffrey stepped up his game. He got his fat ass in the weight room. He worked out. He worked hard. He got himself in shape, kept himself healthy as a result, and had a big-time year. The type of potential that at times, he did flash at South Carolina, along with the inconsistency and the being out of shape and not working very hard. Well, now you've got Brandon Marshall. You've got Alshon Jeffrey. How much harder is it to defend against the Chicago Bears offense, even with a piece of crap like Jay Cutler at quarterback, because you got Brandon Marshall on one side and Alshon Jeffrey at the other side, and you got a Martellus Bennett, and then you've got a Matt Forte coming out of the backfield. That is a very tough defense to game plan against and defend against in the passing game. Well, the Detroit Lions need to get those elements there. They have 2 running backs that are relatively good at catching the ball in the backfield, especially in the case of Reggie Bush, but to a lesser degree, Jacques Bell as well. You've got a tight end of Brandon Pettigrew who's okay. I don't think he's special. They could definitely use a number 2 tight end that could cause some matchup problems for opposing teams. And maybe they've already got that answer in the roster already in Joseph Fourier, the undrafted tight end out of UCLA, who had a big rookie year in terms of touchdown catches. Maybe they find a way to get him more implemented into the offense in 2014 and beyond. But beyond question to me, the number one team need, other than an offensive-minded, quarterback-friendly head coach who can instill some discipline and some mental toughness into the Lions organization, they must, as a team, must get a legit number 2 wide receiver to go opposite of Calvin Johnson. Do not make the mistake of being like the Houston Texans and for so many years have Andre Johnson on one side and then, have the guys like the Kevin Walters and all these other scrubs on the other side of Andre Johnson where teams are allowed to double team on him. He still has big years, but you're minimizing his effectiveness and you're not allowing him to fully capitalize on what it could be because you're not opening things up for him by having weapons all over the place around him, allowing him the freedom to do what he can do. Don't be like the Houston Texans when they finally draft Nuke Hopkins in 2013. It's pretty close to too late because Andre Johnson's at the end of his run. Don't let the Detroit Lions make the same mistake. If you're Martin Mayhew, if you're Lions organization, you must understand you've got Matthew Stafford. You've got Calvin Johnson. The biggest and most dramatic improvement you can make as a football team at this point in time, after the head coach and getting the right guy in charge, is finding that legit number 2 weapon opposite of Calvin Johnson, mirroring what a Green Bay has, mirroring what a Chicago has in your own division, and saying, you know what, you can't just game plan for this guy. We've got weapons all over the place. Whether that's a Sammy Watkins or that's Mike Evans out of Texas A&M, it does not matter at this point in time. You can make arguments for either one of them being the perfect complement to Calvin Johnson in Detroit. The Detroit Lions, beyond question and without repute and without argument, must realize that the guys like the Chris Durhams and the Ryan Broyles and the freaking Nate Burlesons are not the answer. You must get a number 2 wide receiver that can cause opposing defenses fits and trouble and give them nightmares in their game planning because now you've got Calvin Johnson, now you've got this guy too. If you do that as a Lions organization, you bring in a coach that instills some discipline and some mental toughness into this organization, this Detroit Lions team will be a playoff team for sure next year and probably will win the NFC North.